All over Africa, the struggle for independence was tedious, and in many cases resulted in organized attacks and even assassinations. In Nigeria, however, several notable individuals fought for Nigeria's independence. In this video, we will bring to your view top 10 notable Nigerians who laid their lives for Nigeria's independence. Please note, this is not to say that most of them died in the process, but these people made the fight for Nigeria's independence their personal struggle. Without much ado, let's get started. Welcome to History Media, In-Depth History. Ahmadu Bello was the Northern Region's first and only premier who ruled from 1954 to 1966. He led the Northern People's Congress (NPC) to a majority victory in the pre-independence parliamentary elections in 1959. As Sardauna of Sokoto, he was a formidable force behind the throne and was regarded as one of Nigeria's most powerful men. The historic 1959 general elections, which effectively ushered in Nigeria's independence in 1960, saw an alliance between the NPC, led by Ahmadu Bello, and the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, NCNC, led by Nnamdi Azikiwe, resulting in Nigeria's first indigenous federal government. Ahmadu Bello chose to remain the premier of Northern Region and has always preferred to be in the north with his people. His reign was cut short in the January 1966 coup when he was assassinated by Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu in a coup which toppled Nigeria's post-independence government. Nnamdi Azikiwe was a leading figure of modern Nigerian nationalism who spent the majority of his life as a journalist and politician working to end British control of Nigeria. During the First Republic, Azikiwe was Nigeria's last Governor-General from 1960 to 1963, as well as the country's first elected president from 1963 to 1966. After a successful stint as a journalist, he became active in politics in 1944 and later co-founded the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, NCNC. He inspired the Zikist movement, a radical revolutionary and multi-ethnic youth organization that championed the Nigerian fight against imperialism and the belief that Nigerians and indeed Africans should manage their own affairs. As early as the 1940s, Azikiwe advocated for Nigeria's independence from British rule, signing a memorandum in 1943 with other West African editors to raise awareness about political independence. They had also called for socio-political reforms such as the abolition of the crown colony system, the establishment of representative system in regions, and the independence of West African colonies under British rule. An obituary in the 1996 issue of Jet captures his place in Nigeria and Africa's history thus. Known as a vigorous champion of African independence from European colonial rule, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe attained a rare status of national hero, admired across the regional and ethnic lines dividing his country. But do you know that the greatest thing you can do to support our channel is to like this video? Kindly book the like button now, and if you enjoy our channel, please subscribe and hit the bell notification so you will not miss anything. Thank you. After the NPC won the pre-independence parliamentary election, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa became Nigeria's first Prime Minister, a position he held until January 1966 when he was killed in a military coup. During his reign, Balewa was deeply involved in Nigeria's policy-making process and established a formidable reputation among Nigeria's allies around the world, particularly from 1960 to 1961, when he also served as Nigeria's foreign affairs advocate. He was also known to have played key role in the early years of indigenous rule in Africa and to have been a key figure in the formation of the Organization of African Unity, OAU. In the 1950s, he was actively involved in the campaign for indigenous rule and discussions on constitutional reform, which ultimately led to independence in 1960. Chief Obafemi Awolowo, the first premier of Nigeria's western region from 1954 to 1960, was another nationalist who was active in the struggle for the country's independence. For some, he was Nigeria's most prominent federalist, arguing that federalism was the only way to achieve equitable national integration. Awolowo was at the forefront of the campaign for a federal constitution, which was introduced in the 1954 Littleton Constitution, while leading the action group. As a leader of the opposition, he frequently questioned the policies of the Balewa-led government of the Northern People's Party (NPP), which was widely perceived to be aligned with the British colonial administration. Awolowo was one of the country's leading social democratic politicians who, in his agitations for self-rule, was also known to have stood for economic and social development, especially in the western region. Herbert Macaulay, known as the father of Nigerian nationalism, was a pivotal figure in laying the groundwork for modern Nigeria. During the 1920s, when Nigeria began to experience political agitation for self-rule, Macaulay was among the first generation of Nigerian nationalists who protested against British colonial policies such as water rates, land issues, and railway finance management. It was during that time, in 1923, that he founded the Nigerian National Democratic Party (NNDP), Nigeria's first political party whose members were the first to sit in the Legislative Council and which held sway in Nigeria's political theater until the late 1930s, when it joined forces with the Nigerian youth movement to form the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, a nationalist organization designed to advocate for Nigeria's independence. Anthony Enahoro is said to have been the first politician to introduce a motion in Parliament in 1953 in support of Nigeria's independence, though it was unsuccessful. The early agitation for self-rule suffered setbacks, causing northern members of the parliament to walk out of the legislative chamber at one point. Notwithstanding his motion's defeat, it helped to launch a new movement in parliament that kept the pressure on Britain's colonial masters for Nigeria's independence. It also saw the emergence of similar motions, including those from Balewa and Remilekun Fani-Kayode, former deputy premier of the western region, all of which resulted in the independence of Nigeria in 1960. As the chairman of the National Democratic Coalition (NADECO), a pro-democracy group, Enahoro challenged the dictatorship of Sani Abacha till the military leader died suddenly in 1998. Funmilayo Ransome-kuti was another popular opponent of British colonial rule who advocated for citizens' rights prior to independence. She was known as the Lioness of Lisabi for using her influence to mobilize women and organize resistance to colonialism at the time. One such resistance occurred when colonial officers refused to issue permits for demonstrations in parts of Nigeria. This did not deter Ransome-kuti, who had previously spoken out against some of the colonial masters' policies such as taxation and the exclusion of women from decision-making. She organized picnics and festivals for market women, and in 1953 organized a conference in Abeokuta to discuss women's welfare. The meeting gave birth to the Federation of Nigerian Women's Society (FNWS), a women's organization that set out to fight for women's rights against all odds. On February 18, 1977, hundreds of soldiers raided the Lagos residence of Fela Kuti, her son, who was also a known activist, resulting in one of the most memorable moments of her life, which unfortunately resulted in her death. Ransome-kuti, 76 at the time, was thrown from a second-story building window, sustaining injuries that eventually led to her death on April 13, 1978. In writing about the late activist, Cheryl Johnson Odim, prominent academic, noted, quote, "No Nigerian woman of her time ranked as such a national figure or had such international exposure and connections of Ransome-kuti." Mbanaso Ukwara Ozurumba, better known as King Jaja of Opobo, was a prominent nationalist in pre-independence Nigeria. rising from a slave boy to a decorated king. According to one account of his life, King Jaja, who was born of Igbo descent, was sold as a slave to his British master at the age of 12 and renamed Jubo Jugoha. Later, he was resold to Igani Puguma Allison of Boni in modern-day Rivers State, where he became well-liked. King Jaja rose to become the leader of the Ana People's House after he seceded from Boni in 1869 and declared himself King Jaja of Opobo. As king, he was constantly at odds with the British, particularly in Opobo, where he never let them have their way. He was rumored to have monopolized trading in the region and to have shipped palm oil directly to Liverpool, bypassing British middlemen. King Jaja's refusal to stop taxing British traders and merchants infuriated the colonial masters, who later declared Opobo as a territory at the Berlin Conference in 1884. They eventually arrested him in 1887 after a British vice-consul, Henry Hamilton Johnson, invited him to negotiations. King Jaja was sent to Accra, where he was prosecuted and convicted for treaty breaking and blocking of highway trade. In 1891, after serving 4 years in captivity, he was allowed to return home, but never made it home as he died after collapsing when his ship docked on the island of Tenerife. He was rumored to have been poisoned by British seamen. Margaret Ekpo stood out as a political icon in pre-independence Nigeria and beyond, fighting for women's rights and the recognition of women's political roles. Margaret Ekpo was a social mobilizer and grassroots politician who was never intimidated by the men who dominated the political scene at the time. In the 1940s, she was known to attend political and activist meetings to discuss the colonial masters' mismanagement in place of her husband, John Ekpo, who, like other Nigerian medical doctors, despised how they were being treated but was unable to attend such gatherings due to his work as a civil servant. In fighting for the rights of women and their unjust treatment by the colonial masters, Margaret Ekpo registered with the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroon's NCNC, and in the years that followed, joined forces with the likes of Ransome-kuti in mobilizing women to become more involved in politics. In 1953, she was nominated by the NCNC to the Regional House of Chiefs, and in the following year established a pressure group known as the Aba Township Women's Association. Madam Ikona Nwanyoku, the Aba Women's Riot hero. Aba Women's Riot was a group which was a key part of the struggle for Nigeria's independence and which confronted the British maladministration, where women from the southern part of the country known to have carried out the popular Aba Women's Riot. The face of this group was Madam Ikona Nwanyoku. The riot featured women who rebelled against economic and socio-political oppression of the colonial masters in parts of Igbo land, especially the imposition of tax on the market women and the dictatorial powers of the warrant chiefs, who were in power following the introduction of indirect rule system of government. In November 1929, thousands of women assembled in Calabar and Owerri, from where they took over major roads and streets in protest. Some of the warrant chiefs were forced to resign following the riot, which was seen as the first major uprising against the British rule in Nigeria. As a bonus point, let's discuss Enugu local miners' riot. Among those who laid down their lives protesting British maladministration were 21 coal miners who were shot dead at a British government-owned coal mine in Enugu State. During the British colonial rule in Nigeria, coal was one of the major sources of income for Nigeria, and the Iva Valley mines, where the incident took place, had been built by the British. The workers faced harsh working conditions, battling racism and assault in the hands of British colonial masters. On November 1, 1949, the situation escalated with a strike action over debt owed the workers during a period of casualization. Rather than address their demands, the colonial masters sacked some of them and ordered the removal of all coal mines in the Iva Valley. The workers resisted this, fearing that it could result in the mine being shut down. In confronting the protesters, F.S. Philip, the police chief, ordered security operatives to disperse them with gunshots. They ended up shooting dead 21 workers and 1 volunteer, with many more injured. Click this video here for detailed account of how every Nigerian president died and their last words or statements. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Hispel Media. And I will see you in the next one. Peace.